This is a Parsha podcast brought to you by Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study, and I'm your host, Yosefa Fogel-Rubel. Let's learn. Welcome back to our Dvarim series, where our theme for these final episodes of the Jewish calendar year is rabbinic interpretations of the Parshiot. We're looking at mitzvot in the biblical context and also exploring where these ideas are taken in rabbinic literature and later in the halachic realm. This week's episode has been sponsored in honor of Rabbi Ed and Bobby Winter's 60th wedding anniversary. Wow, just have to say that.
Wow.
By their children and grandchildren, Ariel, Lauren, Ilana Ben, and Natan, Yoni, Cindy, Jordan, and Kaylee, and Tamar, Aaron, Eve, and Jacob. Mazel tov to Ed and Bobby on reaching this amazing milestone, and may they continue to enjoy their family and deepen their Torah learning for many years to come.
Mazel tov.
Mamash mazel tov. I want to remind all our listeners that sponsorships are still available for upcoming episodes. You can be in touch with me at podcast@matan.org.il or with the Matan office to sponsor one of our remaining podcasts for the year. It's a great way to mark your occasion and help this listening community grow. I also want to remind you to check out Matan's Elul program on our website, and there's an amazing event coming up to celebrate books published by the Matan scholars through the Kitvuni writing program. Well, we'll speak with another one of them in a moment. The event is called Creating from Life and will be held on September 29th through the 7th of Tishrei and will feature an astonishing panoply of Israeli powerhouses alongside the Matan Kitvuni scholars. Sessions will be held in Hebrew and English that are going to be running in parallel. I'll be there as well, chairing one of the English panel conversations, and I would love to see you there. Parshat Tavo opens with the bringing of one's first fruits to the Mikdash and the moving verbal recitation that accompanies it. The elders are then commanded to record the Torah on monuments, which will later be erected in the land of Israel. This is followed by a series of blessings and curses, which are to be recited on the mountains of Gerizim and Eval in Israel, an event which indeed takes place in the book of Yehoshua. This is followed by what is usually called the blessings and the curses, 14 verses describing the fecundity and providence that is bestowed upon those who follow God's commandments, and 54 verses describing all of the horrific phenomenon that befall those who don't listen to God's commands. In the past years, we've spoken about how stipulations of blessings and curses were a part of all vassal treaties, and that this is a renewal of the treaty for the next generation. I'm really happy the Rabbanit Dr. Adina Sternberg, hi Adina.
Hi.
A longtime lecturer at Matan, who studied in Matan's Hilchot program and is the host of their weekly Hebrew podcast, Mefelshot HaShavua, that she's here to join us for today's episode. Adina also teaches in the Midrasha at Bar Ilan University and in the Mizrahi Lapidot program. Her book, Mi Ohel Moed Liyamei Moed, was published last year by Koren and Matan through the Kitvuni program. The book surrounds the Chagim, different biblical and rabbinic interpretations that are relevant to all of the Chagim time, and it's a wonderful book to learn from during this season. It can be purchased online and in stores in Israel. Adina, I'm happy to be sitting back down with you. We actually sat down almost a year ago. It was actually for Parshat Ha'azinu, where there we spoke even more at length, specifically about your book. But today we want to speak about the different tithes, the different kinds of gifts that we give to Hashem, which is really the first part of this week's Parsha. So why don't you bring us into that world? And I'll say that even for those of us living in Israel, who we actually take maaser pretty regularly because we have a bunch of trees around the neighborhood that our neighbors thankfully let us pick from. It actually helps them. It means that the passion fruits don't just find their way all around the street and get smushed. I would say we even do this pretty regularly, but I don't think we have any really deep understanding of what we're doing. Like, I always feel that even when I do it in my own home or in my kitchen, it's sort of like, I feel like I'm kind of doing the mitzvah. In the real context, it's such a larger amount of fruit, and I don't think I have that much insight really into what I'm doing. So why don't you take us into what these gifts are? Where do they come from? What do they represent?
Okay, well, I'll start with saying thank you for having me here. And I think part of what we're going to be talking about is gratitude and saying thank you. But I do think that there are a lot of nuances here that we need to pay attention to. You started talking about the maaser, about taking the fruit and giving the maaser, but we have, not only do we give the maaser, if we give the maaser, but there are also other presents that we're supposed to give God or his representatives or other people he gives it off to, because our parsha doesn't start with a maaser. Our parsha starts actually with bikurim.
Yeah.
was giving the first fruit, which that I think we don't feel as much, because the first fruit needs to be brought to the mikdash, and that we don't have today. So
ולקחת מראשית כל פרי האדמה אשר תביא מארצך, right? You take from the first fruits. I will say that, by the way, the word reishit is a fairly popular name in Israel, which is also interesting just in terms of how it like shows up in our life. We don't bring bikurim. I know a lot of first daughters who are called reishit.
That's true. And the word reishit actually can mean either the first, like in our parsha. It can also be the best, the choicest. Like we have reishit gez tzoncha a few weeks ago. There isn't really the first of
the shearings.
Yeah. So it can also be the best. Just like it says, we'll read soon about Gad, vayar reishit lo. He saw the best land and he wanted it for himself. So the parsha itself gives us the first fruit, and then it talks about the maaser. Both of them we've been commanded about previously in other chapters, but what I'd say is novelty of mentioning them here, and maybe this actually connects to the rest of the parsha, is that we have a text that comes together with it. We have a text that comes together with bringing the first fruit, what we call mikra bikurim, and we have the text that comes with finishing off giving all the maaser, what Chazal call vidui maaser. Okay, so already mikra versus vidui, a certain reading versus a certain kind of confession. But confession
It's not a word in the Torah, though.
Right.
Meaning that's the phrase that Chazal give it.
Right. Even though the word confession is interesting because the vidui here is saying how I did everything I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
So usually in our mind, the confession is owning up to the bad things that you did.
Yeah.
And here people are taking ownership over, I was okay. I did things the right way. I'm instead of banging on your chest, you're tapping on your back.
Just want to also interrupt you for a moment and say that last year in our episode, I sat with Rabbi Jeff Sachs, and we actually went deep into the tefillah that we say. Right? There's something also incongruous. The idea of the maaser, which comes in Pasuk Yud Bet in the first chapter of the parsha, it seems almost not connected to what happens before. And so there's a connection between the gifts, but we were just in the middle of Mikra Bikurim, so why are we now speaking about maaser? So the connection, as you said, is, well, we've come to the end of the third year, whatever year it is, and now we're going to say that we did everything we were supposed to. And in that conversation, we connected it to the idea of the tshuva season. We're not doing that today. Today, we're doing something totally different. I just want to say, if anyone's interested in thinking more about that and about the tefillot that are said, go back to last year's episode. I think it was a beautiful one that spoke about that idea. Okay,
well, I will just take what you said, that we have here the mikra bikurim, we have here vidui maaser, but the vidui comes together with a prayer.
Yeah.
Because after a person says, I did everything I should have, bi'arti hakodesh min habayit, v'gam netativ lalevi v'lager li'atam, I did everything I needed to do, then it says, hashkifa mim'on kodshecha min hashamayim, uvarech et amcha et Yisrael, etc. Meaning, after we come asking. So part of the question that I always try to figure out is, why do we need to give so much? And why do we need so many different clauses? Meaning, I need to give the first of my fruit, and then I need to give a truma, which isn't mentioned here, but it's mentioned in Bamidbar. And then I need to give a maaser, and then actually, if you look at all of the portions that talk about maaser, you end up bringing two maaserot. You have maaser rishon, which you give to the Levi, and you have maaser sheni that you bring to maaser sheni you bring to Yerushalayim, lamakom asher yivchar Hashem, to the chosen place, and you eat it there. And once every 3 years, you bring the maaser to the poor people. So it ends up that you bring 20% of your produce plus a truma, plus a first fruit. And the question is, it sort of feels like, I don't know how many of your listeners are in Israel, how many are they from abroad, but in Israel there's this one thing where you get your paycheck and you start looking at it, and it depends where you work, but then you have this line, and then you have this line, and if you...
All the things they took off.
All the things they took off, right? They take off for bituach leumi, and they take off for mas achnasa, and they take off, right, social security and income tax, and then there's also a health tax, and then you have also the different kinds of pension plans that so you look at your paycheck, and besides the fact that sometimes also what you get has numerous clauses, but then you start giving to all kinds of different places, sometimes you say, you know what, why don't you just give me the sum you're taking off and figure out by yourself what you're doing with it. Yeah. But so here we end up giving about 20%.
Wow.
Right? Which I don't know if this is a coincidence or if this is planned, but that's what Yosef said that the people should give Pharaoh. When Yosef gives out Pharaoh's land after he bought it from all the people of Egypt, then he says, okay, you guys get 80% and Pharaoh gets 20%. So we think that we give maaser, but in the end, we give this 20% just like the people of Egypt gave Pharaoh.
You're saying maybe it's built on, like there's an ancient Near Eastern kind of element here of maybe what was normative there? Is that the point?
I don't know, but I'm saying that it ends up being the same amount of money. I find it interesting that there's a certain parallel between God and Pharaoh, meaning in the ancient Egypt, the lands belonged to Pharaoh, and therefore he deserves the 20%. Nowadays, we own our homes, we own our businesses, and we still give many percentages to the country. But
I'll just add one thing, and I don't know if they'll have an answer for it today, but another question is just this declaration, what Chazal call again vidui masrot, the fact that we need to make it's one thing when you go and bring your bikurim to the mikdash and you're gonna make I would say like a tekes, you're making a ceremony around it, and it's fascinating because we really don't have a lot of biblical commandments that come along with verses, we have to say. It's very unique, and that's a different conversation. But I think that it's also fascinating that when it comes to the maaserot, that of this particular mitzvah, we need to confess that we did everything right. Meaning, we have so many mitzvot, right? But I think that it might be connected to what you're saying, which is that this is a really hard one. Like this tugs at people's money and what their hard work throughout the whole year, and then giving. Again, a sum total, I know it's not just the maaser, but a sum total about 20%, it's a really, really, really big amount of money. And it's one thing when it feels very theoretical and it's on your paycheck and you're not really looking, you just look at the number at the bottom. But you have to physically give it yourself, meaning there's a very easy ability to not do that, right? And to cheat.
Not only is it easy, many generations didn't do it.
Exactly.
We know that at the times of Chazal, they differentiated between the chaverim, that were an elite group, versus the Am Haaretz. Now, there were certain things that chaverim were an elite group because they did things that they didn't have to do, like all kinds of things that have to do with being pure, even when you don't have to be pure, and different stringencies that they had there. But there was another issue that defines the chaverim was that they were makbid on giving maaser. And Am Haaretz weren't, because really it was very, very hard. Nowadays, we have a certain kind of abundance, and we feel it, but not as much, I think.
Farmers feel it. I mean, there's a lot. They feel the challenge of this, but I agree with you. On a daily basis, we don't feel the challenge of it.
That's true. But I think also when we talk about this vidui, and that is something I want us to talk about, is a different kind of texts that we say with the different kinds of presents that I think reflects what each present is trying to achieve. Meaning, when we ask ourselves, why do we have different kinds of presents? I think part of what... I'll go back a second. Some people will tell you there are different presents because each present has a different thing that it's trying to achieve in the world. Meaning, some things go to the Kohanim, and the Kohanim need to have something to eat. Some things go to the Levim. The Levim need to have some kind of salary, something that to sustain them. Some things are brought to Yerushalayim and we eat it there, and then Sefer Chinuch will tell us this is a kind of a sabbatical. We put aside our fruit or money that is redeemed from the fruit, and then when we go to our annual or biannual or whatever vacation, Yerushalayim, we have food to eat and we don't have to worry about the expenses. So we can say that there are different, and of course there's also the maaser that goes to the poor people. So you can say we have different kinds of clauses of what exactly we're giving because we're trying to take care of different types of challenges. Okay, just like when I look at my paycheck, some things go to finance the country, and some things go for my social security, and some things go for the health plan of the etc. But I think it's more than that. I think it's not only what we're trying to achieve in the world, but also it comes to reflect different achievements in our Avodat Hashem, in our perception of the world. And for that, I want us to go back and say, the Torah commanded us to give Truma and Bikurim and Maaser, but the Torah didn't invent it. These were presents that people gave from the dawn of history. Because when we meet Cain and Hevel, they're already giving presents to God.
Yeah.
And when we go back there and we try to think to ourselves, what did they bring? So with Hevel, it's easier. Because Cain, it tells us, if we go back to reishit, Parak Dalet, and you go in, you see that Cain and Hevel, each one of them chose a different job, a different career, right? So we know that that Hevel was a ro'etzon, he was a shepherd, and Cain היה עובד אדמה, he was a farmer. ויהי מקץ ימים ויבא קין מפרי האדמה מנחה להשם. So at the end of a year, Cain brings from the fruit of his land a present to God. It's not quite clear what he gives, right? והבל הביא גם הוא. So Hevel also brought מבכורות צונו ומחלביהן. So Hevel, we do know what he brings. He brings from the bechorot, the firstborn, and the chelev, which is the fatty part of either of other animals, or he brought also animals that were choicest, right? Sometimes we say chelev as a metaphor for the best, the fattiest, and not just the chelev, the fat itself. So Hevel, we know he brought the firstborn, and maybe the chelev, the choicest, which in my mind is connected to the concept of truma, because truma comes together with bringing it a chelev, dagan, tirosh, veitzah, reishit.
From Cain's, it says pri hadama. It sounds like he's bringing bikurim, right? He's bringing. It doesn't say the word reishit.
It doesn't say the word reishit. I'd actually want to claim that he's not bringing bikurim because the text emphasizes that Hevel brought bechorot zono v'chelvehem.
So his must not be the first. It must be something else.
Must be something else.
Okay.
Right? So some of the parshanim will say he brought the less of the lesser ones, the least good or whatever. We'll get back to Cain in a second because Hevel has a certain inclination and intuition that what he needs to bring is the first, right? And he brings the first and also the choicest. And we'll get back to Cain in just a second, but if I go forward and I look at other people who bring presents, so we'll find the maaser. We'll find Melchizedek Melech Shalem and Avraham, where it's not quite clear who gave who, so I don't want to get into that. But we will find the maaser with Yaakov Avinu, right? Yaakov Avinu, when he leaves his parents' home, and he stands there in Beit El, and he's talking to God, and God promises him the land and promises him protection. So Yaakov wakes up, Vayidar Yaakov neder le'emor. So it starts off with a vow. אם יהיה אלוהים עמדי ושמרני בדרך הזה אשר אנוכי הולך ונתן לי לחם לאכול ובגד ללבוש. So if God is going to be with me and he guards me where I go and he gives me food and he gives me clothes ושבתי בשלום אל בית אבי and he'll bring me back safely והיה השם לי לאלוהים. You can ask if that's part of the vow or part of the promise that God will be Hashem will be my God. והאבן הזאת אשר שמתי מצבה יהיה בית אלוהים. So I'll turn this stone into a house of God. וכל אשר תיתן לי 10 לך. Everything you give me, I will give you 10%. Now when I look at the differences of the story of Cain and Hevel, I'm putting Cain on the side a second, but I look at Hevel and I look at Yaakov, and I try to feel the vibe.
Yeah, what's the atmosphere of their gifts?
Right. And if I look at Yaakov, what's the atmosphere that comes up when he says, if you do A, B, C, D, then I'll give you my maaser.
Yeah.
Right?
All the Parshanim ask that on Yaakov. They say, who are you to make a deal with God? It's a very big theological question when it comes to here.
Now, I think that it's a twofold question, because one question is about the vow, because I think vows is like making a deal with God, right? It's trying to, bend God's arm and say, okay, now you do what I'm telling you. But I think also, why does he have to promise a maaser? Isn't that a given, right? Why does he have to promise? To me, it sounds very much like a business transaction. If God, you do ABCs, then you'll be deserving of something that I give you, right? It feels very much like a business transaction. And when we go back to our parsha, also the vidui maslot feels like a business transaction. I did A, B, C, D, And now it's your turn, hashkifa mimon kodshecha, right? In both texts, we have this, I do my part and you do your part.
Some sort of joint cooperation going on.
Exactly. And that relates to me to the idea that in maaser we're giving percentages, right? As opposed to the bikurim, which we'll talk about in just a second. Bikurim, you give something very symbolic, right? Like, ironically, when you give the bikurim, you're giving the first. And when you give the first, in a sense, I feel that a person who gives the first, you talked about how hard it is to give the maaser because it's a lot, but giving the first is also very hard, right?
Yeah, relinquishing your control.
Right. And I think it's very symbolic, but part of what it's trying to say is actually everything is God's, right? Everything comes from God. And I'm giving something very symbolic, the first, to say, this represents everything. I should have given you everything, but I'm giving you something symbolic, right?
I just think another thing that's important here is that when we see these precedents and the stories of here, that's our avot, and Cain and Hevel, obviously it's earlier. I think that the Torah is also coming to try and tell us that we're going to codify this in law later on, but these ideas should be part of the natural impulse of humans, right? It's for sure, again, it's based also in ancient Near East. We also know that they had some sort of gifts like this, which of course get sublimated into different kinds of relationships with God that we'll continue unpacking. But it's also coming to say that even before the Torah comes and commands this, that this is part of sort of the natural way that a person should be interacting with the world.
Right. And if we go back and we say, okay, you know what? Hevel has this very important intuition. He got everything from God, and he wants to give back the firstborn. We'll have the idea of giving the firstborn to God afterwards, as you said, in the law, after Yetziat Mitzrayim, where we realize that Bnei Bechorei Yisrael, we all belong to God, and all of our firstborns should have died, and we're giving our firstborns to God to say thank you for everything, for all of our children, for all of our nation, for everything. And I think when we read Mikra Bikurim, the whole idea of Mikra Bikurim is saying, God, look at all the things you did for us. You took us out of Egypt, you gave us this land, you gave us this fruit, and now I'm coming to say thanks. Okay, so it's I think it's a feeling, the vibe that I get is total gratitude.
With bikurim.
With bikurim, when you bring the first, okay? It's, you see a full orchard, you find your vineyard, and what you do is instead of saying mine, you say, this is God's.
Yeah, a very clear declaration that this is not kochi ve'otzim yadi, that this is something that belongs to Hashem, which is very different than when you are looking at all of your produce and saying, well, a certain percentage is mine, right? But another percentage I'm going to give elsewhere.
Exactly. When you give out percentages, the feeling is of a partnership, as you said, is that we have here, maybe God should have gotten more percentages in terms of what he did, but I think the feeling is very, very different. Now, the feeling also comes together with our time, meaning the bikurim, we bring at the beginning. Okay? Before we even, step into the land to claim ownership, you say, you're not the owner. God is the owner. And you give him the first, you organize a ceremony. Before you do anything else, you have to say thank you to all the people who donated, all the people who made it happen, all the people, right? And then you can continue in the ceremony. So we say thank you to God, and then you continue in the ceremony. But when you give maaser, you do it at the end of the process, after you've collected everything. And then you say, okay, let's start giving out percentages. What's mine? What's God? And the feeling is a very, very strong feeling of partnership. And when you're in a partnership, you can say, okay, I did A, B, C. God, now it's your turn to do D, E, and F. Or, God, you gave me A, B, C, and now it's my turn to give you back.
I just want to say that it doesn't take out the theological question. It doesn't eliminate the question of how Yaakov speaks to Hashem. But I would say it differently. Instead of it, well, the question still remains. I think that it's just laying down a fact. It's laying down a fact that we don't really ever know or understand God, but there is a way to communicate with God that's like this. Meaning, I think it sets a precedent. It doesn't eliminate the theological question. We can sit and philosophize about it. But instead of that, we could say, this is a legitimate channel of how to speak to God, of saying, here's a lot of effort I put in, God. Now, please, 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 please do your part now, right? And it's a different, you're right, it's a different heart space than being like, none of this belongs to me. And I think that I would even just say in the modern world, I think that the maaser the maaser heart space is even slightly more common. Like I think a lot of us in the modern world are very used to this kind of partnership, or everybody has to do their hishtalut or whatever phrase we've grown up with. And I think that that's something I know that I certainly can relate to that heart space much more than being like, none of this is mine. I'm gonna just give that korban and step back. That's much harder for me as a modern person.
Right. Well, I want to take these two ideas back to Cain and Hevel. Okay.
Yeah.
Because Hevel, we said, brought the first.
But I just want to say that both of their offerings are called a mincha in the pasuk, which is interesting. That mincha is just right. It's a general word for offering, but as you're saying, it's not a specific word because each of them are doing something very different.
Right. And when Hevel brings the firstborn, I think he's trying to say, yes, I think everything belongs to God.
Yeah.
So what did Cain bring? What I would like to suggest is that after we see the paradigms of the first or the choicest and the maaser, I would like to suggest that Cain brought the maaser. And I even have a certain kind of proof. I don't know if it's proof, but some kind of something that will help out that perush, Vahi miketz yamim, at the end of the year. Right? If we talked about the timeline, the bikurim you bring at the beginning, but the maaser you bring at the end. After you've finished harvesting, after you've finished collecting, after you've finished taking invoice, seeing how much you have, at the end of the year, vayaveh Cain mipri adama mincha LaHashem. And I would like to add also that it says, Vehevel hevi gam hu mibchorot zono michelvein. I always wondered, I'm one of the younger children in the family. I'm the sandwich. And sometimes it's annoying, and I have also I'm the sandwich, okay? But sometimes it's annoying when the younger child copycats the older child.
It's like 55 fights in my home in the past week.
Okay, and then the younger one gets the credit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So here Cain brought a mincha LaHashem, and then Hevel also brings a mincha LaHashem, and he's the one who gets all the credit. And what I would like to suggest two things. One is that chronologically, I'm not sure that Cain was the first one to bring.
Fascinating, because the first come out are born before the end of the year.
Right, because the firstborn you bring at the beginning, and Vahi miketz yamim, ve'eveh Cain mipri adama mincha LaHashem. So it's at the end of something, at the end of what? And I'd like also to say, ve'hevel hevi gam hu. He maybe had already brought. Also he brought. When? Maybe even previously. Not only that, when it talks about God's answer, Vayisha Hashem el Hevel vel minchato, God answered Hevel. Vel Cain vel minchato, Cain already had a certain anticipation of what's going to happen when he brings his mincha. And the only reason that he's disappointed is because he already saw what happened to Hevel's mincha.
Yeah.
But then you need to ask yourself, wait, but you just said, look, the Torah is telling us that this is a legitimate way of conversing with God. This is a good way to give God from our fruit.
To give a percentage.
So why doesn't God accept Cain's offering? I think that the Torah wants us, and I think as parents we can very much relate to this, the Torah wants us to be able to hold two very contradicting feelings among us. Okay? One feeling is a feeling that I am Hevel. I am nothing. Everything is from God. I didn't do anything. Even if I did, it's only because God gave me the power and the energy to do it. Everything is from God. Okay? That's one feeling. Anochi afar ve'efer. And another feeling is a certain kind of kochi ve'otimidi, which is, you know what, I'm a partnership. I'm in a partnership with God. I'm God's partner. God gave the land, He gave the sun, He gave the rain, but you know what, I woke up at 4 a.m. to sow the land. I woke up and harvested it. I worked very hard. It's a very physical labor, and I worked very hard. And I think that also is reflected in Cain's name, because when Chava has her son, she says, Kaniti ish et Hashem. Kaniti is created. I created a man together with God. She's feeling this feeling of partnership.
Yeah.
Right? And so Cain grows up feeling this partnership with God. And so he says, okay, I'm partners with God. Let's give him a percentage of what I did in the land. Hevel, I don't know what kind of name his mother gave him, but Hevel grows up feeling that he's Hevel, that he's nothing.
He's nothing.
And so when he has his sheep, he's like, well, I don't deserve any of this. Look, God, I'm giving you the first to show that I appreciate this. And I think if I go back to being parents, I think when we raise our children, we want them to sort of like be able to feel both feelings. Like we want them to be able to know, okay, I carried you for 9 months, right? You're only here because we brought you here. And we did everything for you to come out into this world. And you need to remember that. But when they grow up, we also want them to remember that they can do something in the world, that they have power, that they have responsibility, that they can take ownership, you know?
I think you're getting at the difficulty in chiseling out a gratitude approach. Like, what does that look like? Meaning, because you're right, at the root of being grateful is a person understanding how much place they have in that dynamic. The more, in theory, the more you're thankful, the more you realize that nothing here is a given, right? That nothing here is really totally up to you. And there is a really delicate balance between assuming responsibility and acting in this world, and also being grateful that an outcome happens. I think that the shift, for those who are the more confident kinds out there, I think the shift happens when a person realizes deeply that there is not always going to be a correlation between how hard you work and the outcome, right? Shelo tamid yesh sachar lefulati. And so the gratitude doesn't have to be from this place of I'm nothing and I really can't do anything in this world. But the gratitude comes from a place of saying, Eze yofi, I put in work, and Hakadosh Baruch Hu or my parents and all those other factors came together, timing, right, came together to make this actually pass.
So I think the Torah really wants, I think this is also part of the Jewish neurosis, like that the Torah gives us so many contradicting ideas and feelings, but the Torah really wants us to feel at the same time, or maybe not at the same time. And I think that's maybe part of the deal, that Hevel feels it at the beginning. And if at the beginning, when you just are standing in front of your field and you're like, wow, thank God it worked, as you said, then afterwards, at the end of the harvesting, you can also come and say, oh, wow, I did something here. Yeah. Let's feel this partnership with God.
Yeah.
There's one thing, again, if we're going towards Yamim Noraim, there's one kind of feeling when you enter Yamim Noraim, and some people really relate to this feeling, that they enter Yamim Noraim and they feel like they don't deserve anything. And, you know, people crying in the middle of the tefillah, and whatever. I don't relate to that. Mm-hmm. Like, I find it sometimes a little bit, I don't know if hypocritical, but I don't relate to that. I don't relate to this idea that I've done nothing and I don't deserve anything. But maybe I should. Maybe I should feel it a little bit more. The idea that the life isn't a given and things aren't unconditional. But some people come and say, you know what, God? I've gone through a process. I've checked myself. I'm taking all kinds of steps to make myself better. And
what you're explaining is more of a maaser mentality.
Yes.
Okay, so there's this maaser mentality, and there's the bikurim mentality. Okay, Trumot fits in.
Trumot, I would say, is sort of kind of like comes on the basis of avat Hashem. Like if you love someone, you give them something that's nice. That the best thing goes to God, just because we love Him. Okay, which is another dynamic of loving God versus fearing God, which is another tension that we won't get into now. But. Yeah. But Truma is like stands out as an act of love.
And in terms of who receives these gifts, again, not today because we don't have a mikdash,
right.
But who receives them? Does that tie into these different heart spaces?
Yes, I think it does, because bikurim and Truma go to the kohanim. Okay, it should go to God. Like the bikurim, you come all the way up to the mizbeach and then you give it to the kohen.
Oh, God's representative in that moment.
But the maaserot we actually use as the Levim, we get the maaser, and it says chelef avodatam. It's their salary.
Right.
Salary comes in a world of partnership.
Exactly.
You gave me a service, and I'm paying you for your service, right? And there's a certain kind of partnership. If I come before God and I bring the fruit that I grew and I eat it together with God in His mikdash, with maaser sheni. And I think there's a certain kind of partnership, and that's something that relates also to today, in giving the maaser to the poor people. Because giving the maaser to the poor people, you could say I'm giving it to a representative of God, but you can, or I gave it to God and God gave it to the poor people. But I think it also has to do with a certain understanding that there's a partnership between us and God in the world of taking care of the world, right? God says, I've given you the world, and now let's see how you make it better. Let's see how you take care of the different social issues that you need to take care of. And in that case, we're sort of partners with God. God gave us different areas and realms where we can be active. He wants us to take care of the poor people, right? Yeah. So nowadays, if you think today, right, you come back to today, we don't have bikurim today. We give the truma, but we also give it very symbolically because truma needs to be eaten when you're pure. Nobody's pure today, so we don't actually give it to the kohanim. Maaser, some people give. Some people say, well, you know what? 1 second. Maaser to the Levi. Go prove that you're a Levi, right? I'm a Levi. I'm a bad Levi. But go prove that you're a Levi, right? And to the poor people, well, go prove that you're poor. And then eating in Jerusalem, well, you can't do that because there's no mikdash. Okay, so you end up actually not giving a lot of maaser. So we don't feel it so much today. I think that we do have two things that halacha has given us as a certain kind of substitute. One is, it's not even a halacha. I think it's more like a minhag that people did in order to implement in our lives what the Torah wanted, and that's the idea of maaser ksafim. Mm-hmm. Halachically, it's not quite clear how obligated we are to maaser ksafim, but it's a really nice minhag.
Yeah.
It's really nice, okay? We've also taken it, with a pinch of salt because we only give one maaser. We don't give 20%, we give 10%, right? But sometimes you ask yourself, okay, so where does that concept of the first, of the bikurim? So you do have it with pidyon bechorot, right? My grandson went through a pidyon bechorot. He's a firstborn, so we had pidyon bechorot. So that sort of brings forth the idea that this son is not necessarily yours and that it's not a given. It doesn't happen that much.
Nope.
Okay.
Never been at one.
You've never been at one?
Nope.
So that was my first, I think. No, actually, I was at another one. So it is kind of rare because if you take off the 50% of girls that are born first, and you take off all those that had miscarriages before, and you take off all those who were kohanim and leviim,
and C-sections, and
C-sections, and all.
It doesn't happen so often,
right? So it doesn't happen. So the idea, you do it every once in a while, but you don't feel it on a day-to-day basis. So where do we have this idea? I think Chazal, it did implement it in a different way through brachot, through saying the bracha before you eat. Right? When in Masechet Brachot, in the Mishnah, when it talks about the different brachot that you say before you eat it, so we have a bracha before we eat, we have bracha after we eat. Now the bracha after you eat is deoraita because it says in the Torah, v'achalta v'savata u'varachta. So the idea of saying thank you to God and blessing God after eating, that's something that the Torah gave us. But what about saying thank you to God or blessing before we eat? That's midrabanan.
Yeah.
And where does that come from? So one of the sources that Chazal give to that is the concept of Kodesh Hilulim LaHashem. And Chazal learned from this that Kodesh Hilulim LaHashem, you have two Hilulim, two Halel. You praise God twice, once before the food and once after the food. Afterwards they say that maybe they'll give another idea, and that is that you can't enjoy from the world of God before saying thank you, because otherwise you're stealing.
Yeah.
Okay? Both of these drashot come together with the idea of the first, of giving the bikurim, of before you enjoy the world, before you take anything, understand that everything is from God. Okay? Whether we learn it just from the concept that if I eat fruit that I grew without saying thank you to God, I am stealing from God, that's assuming that everything is God's. Right? It's not that we're a partnership. And if I say a bracha before because I'm mimicking or I'm implementing the idea of Kodesh Hilulim LaHashem, I'm saying a bracha. I'm not giving anything physical, but I am recognizing God's ownership over everything.
What you're pointing out is that in our daily lives, on one hand, the brachot are really a model of the reishit model of like before you do anything, recognize God. But a lot of these things that we make a bracha on, we're actually going to then go and use them to be a partner with God.
In order to give a person a sense of responsibility, capability,
an agency, yeah.
Then you need to also give him a halachic form of expressing it, and that's through the maaser.
I think that's beautiful. Adina, thanks for being here. Always
Thanks for
appreciate
having me.
sitting and learning Torah with you. And I think that this is a great topic because, again, for most of us, it doesn't have that much of an expression in our daily lives. So I think that the takeaway here is also really, really significant. So thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode from Matan Women's Institute for Torah Study. If you would like to sponsor an episode, please contact the Matan office or email me at podcast@matan.org.il. Please do us and all women's Torah learning a favor and share this episode with all of your friends and family.